The Motor Dream podcast is recorded on Wallamedigal land of the Eora Nation. It always was and always will be the lands of the First Nations of Australia.
This is the Motor Dream podcast.
Welcome to the podcast where we can dream just a little about what our dream garage would be if money was no issue whatsoever. I'm Connor McNally and it's great to have your company once again. Since I started doing this series, I've had a wide variety of cars and bikes that have been added to the dream garage. Some are very common, some exemplify the true meaning of a dream car. But there are those that you totally don't expect, like the Gordon Murray Automotive T50 or an Alpine A510, both old and current. But in the last few weeks, there's been a little bit of chatter about what some consider as the worst car ever made by Holden. Now, for context, let's go back to episode 18, featuring Moog from Mighty Car Mods and Top Gear Australia.
I had a Holden Chimera for a short period of time, unfortunately.
Oh.
That was the car I had there. Just stop it. Don't judge me. No, dude. It was canary yellow, had a cassette deck, used to drive around listening to heavy metal. And I did a road trip down to Melbourne, but I don't believe I actually made it because that car was just an utter piece of shit. I want to buy another one. And I probably shouldn't have said that because any weird bids that actually own one that were planning on selling them are probably listing them on Marketplace right now. I did see an ad for a Holden Chimera last week. It was under $2,000 and the person who had listed it had said, one day this will be a classic. No,
It ain't.
it's not going to be a classic.
Well, not long after that, a certain co-host of the Full Credit to the Noise podcast, the former legend, came out recently on his socials declaring his fondness for the Holden Chimera itself and that it was an Aussie classic. I slipped into his DMs on Instagram and told him he was 100% wrong, that it was rubbish, and that Moog from Mighty Car Mods backed up our claim that it was rubbish. As you can imagine, that sparked a rather lively chat between us, and despite this, he wasn't backing down on his statement. Well, former, you're welcome to come onto the podcast anytime, and I dare you to find someone who is willing to go public and back up your claim that it is an Australian car classic. But I'm afraid the Holden Chimera deserves to be where it belongs.
In the bin.
Right, now that's out of my system, let's get on to the podcast. If you've been along for the ride from the very first episode, thank you so much for being a part of it. If you're new, welcome along and make sure you catch up on all previous episodes by liking and subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, as well as following us on social media. We'll give you more details at the end of the show. For all you newbies who've discovered this podcast, here's how it goes. I tell my guests that one day they wake up and they check their phones to discover that they've received a text to say that they need to check their bank balance. They open up their bank app and they suddenly discover that their bank balance has gone to infinity. They are instant billionaires. As soon as they discover their newfound fortune, they get an email from this mystery benefactor that tells them that they can spend anything that they like and they can buy any car, bike or machine that they want. There is a catch though. They are only allowed 3 cars, bikes or machines in their dream garage. Sounds easy, doesn't it? But let me tell you, my previous guests have found it very, very hard to decide. You'll get to hear from drivers and riders from within the motorsport game, as well as those who work in the motoring industry, and on the odd occasion you'll hear from some prominent personalities who all share the same passion of cars and bikes as well as motoring. Now, the sport of Formula One has enjoyed a massive increase in its audience over the last 8 years, thanks largely to Drive to Survive. The flow-on effect is that we have seen a lot of social media influencers who have really jumped onto the sport and promoted the cause to an even bigger audience. But for long-time fans like myself, they'll never know the struggle of growing up in the 1990s and 2000s, waiting up late most Sunday nights to watch each Grand Prix, usually on delay, on Channel 9 or Network 10. And for me, despite the lack of sleep, and there was plenty of that, this period of the sport was the best. It was also a period of change in the field of broadcasting the sport. In 1997, British broadcaster ITV had won the rights to broadcast Formula One to millions of fans across the UK after 18 years with the BBC. The change to commercial television also meant that for the first time, there was a budget that allowed a huge production to travel the entire 17-race season as it was back then, and with it came an expanded commentary and analysis team. Headlined by the late great Murray Walker and joined by Martin Brundle, ITV's team included James Allen, Ted Kravitz, Mark Blundell, Jim Rosenthal and previous guest Steve Ryder, to name a few. But they also made Formula One broadcasting history, where they included the first female pit reporter as part of their team. Nowadays, they are very much a common sight in many motorsport broadcasts worldwide and have rightfully earned their place in the paddock. But in 1997, it was a bold move, and they employed someone who had already gained the respect of the paddock working for Jordan Grand Prix. Despite feeling like a fish out of water initially, Louise Goodman quickly became one of the most trusted reporters in Formula One, and she was fortunate to have witnessed some of the most memorable moments in the sport's history. She was one of the first to interview her former boss, Eddie Jordan, after Damon Hill won the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix, the first for Jordan. She was also the first to interview newly crowned world champion Lewis Hamilton in the chaotic moments after the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix, which would also be ITV's last official Formula One broadcast. She also created history by becoming the first woman to be a part of a Formula One pit crew at the 2006 British Grand Prix for Midland F1. That team is known these days as Aston Martin. Louise is very much a trailblazer in her own right, though by her own admission, working in motorsport wasn't part of her career plan. But having grown up around cars since she was a child, it's very much in her DNA. Outside of her media interests, she's done some occasional racing and has even finished third in her class at the British round of the World Rally Championship in 1999. So she is just as talented behind the wheel as she is behind a microphone. These days, Goodman still occasionally travels around the world to do some Grand Prix as host and expert for their event's big screen coverage, which includes the Australian Grand Prix alongside Greg Rust, Matt Nolte and Cameron van der Dungen, to name a few. She also continues her long-standing association with ITV as co-host of their coverage of the British Touring Car Championship seen on the screens of ITV4, and now around the world exclusively via TikTok, the first of its kind on that platform. I had the chance recently to chat with Louise just prior to the start of the 2024 BTCC season getting underway, and she was full of excitement for the season ahead, as well as the new broadcast deal with TikTok, opening the door for a new worldwide audience. Plus, she had some really cool stories to tell from her long and successful career, and one of her cars in her dream garage is very unique, as you'll soon discover. So without further ado, it's a great pleasure to welcome Louise Goodman to the Motor Dream podcast. Louise Goodman, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the Motor Dream podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Connor. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. For those that have watched you in the past or listened to you in the past, we know you as the voice of the Formula One pit lane in the ITV coverage during 1997 to 2008, which we saw on Channel 9 here in Australia and then on Channel 10. And you gained quite a bit of a following. In fact, everyone that watched Formula One loved your work in that very, very electric time of the sport where we saw Michael Schumacher come to prominence, where we saw the battles between himself, Jacques Villeneuve and Mika Hakkinen. What an exciting time it was to be in that time of sport.
Oh, well, thank you for your kind words. And yes, it was. It was a really exciting time. I mean, I think there were exciting times before and there have been exciting times since. But, you know, that was my era, my generation, my age of racing drivers. I think that's what, for me, made a difference. It's the guys who we kind of grew up together in the Formula One paddock. So it was great watching them racing out there on track.
It was an interesting time for the British viewing public because they had been so used to watching the Formula One World Championship on the BBC as it was back in the day, and then the ITV came along and took the rights from the BBC, which began in 1997. And I think a lot of people were surprised at the time when you were announced as the pit reporter, along with James Allen, who trundled up and down pit lane, and you. Not necessarily a newcomer to the sport. You've been around for quite a number of years, but you're a newcomer to the television side of things. Talk to us how that all transpired and how it all happened in that very first year. Because 1997, we all know what happened with Michael Schumacher and Jacques Villeneuve, and you were right in the coalface of it.
Yeah, as you say, I've been working in the sport for a little while. I started in the very, very late 1980s with a team called Leighton House, and then went to work for Jordan Grand Prix, so on the media side. Um, ITV took over the right to show Formula One, but they put the contract out to tender for a production company to actually make the programs. So I was approached by one of those production companies. It was a company called Mac One. So it was made up of some of the regional ITV stations, Meridian and Anglia, and then Chrysalis. And they approached me because they wanted to have a female on the team to reflect the fact that there were, quite a large number of women amongst the audience. So I guess they could either have taken somebody who knew about TV and taught them about the sport, but luckily for me, they decided to take somebody who knew about the sport to teach them about TV. So I was approached by them, but to be honest, it was quite an abstract concept initially because there were various different companies bidding for the contract. So it only became a reality when it was announced that Matt had won the deal to make the program. So then it was a sort of, oh my God, I'd been, can I really do this? And there was a bit of a gap between the deal being announced with Mac One and then actually being in a position they had to have various conversations with Bernie Ecclestone to so that he could approve the programming, give the number of passes, etc., because ITV were doing it in quite a different way to the way it had been done previously with the BBC. So there was that interim period when everybody found out the names of the people who were on the bid: Murray, Martin, James, myself. So by the time it came about that ITV were formally in a position to offer me a contract, everybody assumed I was doing it anyway. So it was almost as if this sort of decision was made for me as I went along, which I think is a good thing, because I think, to go from an abstract concept of do you want to do this to the reality of, right, you have no television experience and there could be 7, 8, 9 million people watching, which there were back then in the day, was really quite scary. And my first race in Melbourne, I was absolutely terrified. I had very little television experience, so it was in at the deep end. But as I say, I knew the sport, I knew the people in the sport. That's really why I was employed. I kind of knew what to ask and I knew when to ask it. So that's where my strengths lay, rather than in terms of any broadcasting skills. That bit I just had to sort of make up as I went along.
And you've been a trailblazer ever since. But I do remember very first race, Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne, and of course the first one for ITV. So a whole new world, whole new way of thinking for the British public to tune in. And your very first live interview during the race itself was with Damon Hill, because he stopped on the very first lap.
Formation lap,
yeah.
Exactly. And I dread to think back on it, because I think I just said, when you never supposed to, what happened, Damon? Which is like the most boring question you can ask. And he told me, and I just said, thank you. And Damon was looking at me as if to say, you're supposed to ask a follow-up question at that point. And I was just like, oh my God. So yeah, I also did an interview with Eddie Irvine on the grid. And it was purely coincidental. So Eddie was sitting on the floor. I'd worked with Eddie as his press officer. We always got on very well. And I knew if I said to him, stand up, he'd, stand up, I want to do an interview. He'd say, I'm not getting up, you get down here. So I just sat down next to him because I knew it would be easier than having an argument. Did the interview with him, basically sat alongside him on the pit wall, back against the pit wall. And after the race, Neil Duncanson, who was our boss at the time, said, that's exactly what we want, a different style, a different way of doing things. It was relaxed. I thought, I'd laughed to myself. I thought, well, that's only because I knew Irv would tell me to F off if I tried to make him stand up.
Luckily, he didn't say that.
No, he didn't. It was tough that year. I was very aware of the fact that at times, I'm not very good at not being very good at things, and I wasn't very good as a broadcaster. I was learning in a very public eye. But eventually, at the kind of halfway through the season, I can remember some of the drivers, Johnny Herbert in particular, saying to me at the British Grand Prix, actually, you're getting the hang of this now, aren't you? And I said, well, I'm feeling a bit more relaxed. And he said, oh, right, great, right, time to have a bit of sport then. And I thought, oh, no, Johnny, don't do this. So, he then proceeded to, we used to play this little game of, I'd be standing beside him on the grid waiting for them to throw down live to me, and Johnny would start kind of poking me off camera and I'd elbowing him back off camera. But as I say, it really helped. The drivers, the teams, it was almost like, because they knew me, they were great with me. I think it was easier, than it may have been for some total stranger coming in and trying to build those relationships. Because I think, as an interviewer, as a pit lane reporter, it's all about those relationships.
Absolutely. And those relationships have obviously helped you as the years gone by. What's been the most satisfying race that you have done in your time as pit reporter?
It's really difficult to choose one, to be honest. I suppose one that does stand out, though, was I'm rubbish on years, but whichever year it was, the disastrous US Grand Prix
Oh,
at
2000,
India, when we had
2005.
the
Yeah.
tyre debacle. You know, that as a piece of live broadcasting, we literally, you know, when you're doing a live show, you have what we call a running order. So everything is itemized to the minute, to the second, what's happening, who's talking, where the VT is coming from, etc., etc., etc. But of course, as we went on air there, we basically ripped up the running order. That story was developing so quickly. We had to follow the story. That was the only thing to be talking about. So, I mean, all credit to Jim Rosenthal, who was our lead presenter at the time, because to do that as a broadcaster, to not know where you're going to next, you know, it's hard work. Trust me, it's hard work. So, and you know, and Ted and I were just running around trying to follow up on the story, trying to get information, to feed information back to the guys. So are we going to have a race? Who's going to be starting the race? So we're running around trying to get that information, but then also get people to do interviews as well, because otherwise you've just got Jim chatting with Mark Blundell, who was our analyst. You know, they're just standing there hanging, waiting for another piece of information to come in and a bit of variety, an interview, whatever it might be. So I think that as a piece of live telly was, you know, that was an incredible job that the whole crew did at that event. So that's one that stands out. But otherwise, you know, it's the ones where people that I'd worked with got great results. You know, Rubens Barrichello winning in Hockenheim, and we had those tears. You know, Eddie Irvine's first race win. You know, things like that. They're the Jensen's first win in Hungary. You know, they're the ones that really stand out. DC's last race in Brazil. You know, those kind of things.
I do remember also you almost, I guess in some ways had the exclusive of having to interview Damon after the race when he almost won the Hungarian Grand Prix. Now, if it wasn't for that hydraulic issue that happened with a few laps remaining, he should have won that race and should have won Arrow's first race.
And actually, that's a good race to bring up, because that was a good example of where, just to blow my own trumpet a bit, where I was in the Arrows garage. I was in the Arrows garage because I knew all of the Arrows guys, and therefore they let me stand in their garage. And I could tell from the body language something was going on. Their guys leading the race. That's why I'd gone in there, because this is going to be a big story. Damon's, you know, going to win. I could just tell from the body language of all the guys in the garage something's gone wrong. Nobody was saying anything. So I went and found a lady called Anne Bradshaw, who was their press officer at the time, who I'd known for many, many years. She was like my mum when I first came into the sport. So again, had that relationship. And I said, Annie, what's happening? And she looked at me with a sort of, you know, don't you? It was like, I can tell I've got to say something. So she gave me a little bit of insight into what was happening, and I was able to break that news, which, you know, obviously it wasn't news that I wanted to break, but as a reporter, that's exactly what you're there to do, is to find the stories and to let people know about the stories. So that meant that, you know, when it eventually came about that, you know, the problem with the car became evident, we'd already mentioned it before it became evident out on the track.
And you broke so many hearts, so many British hearts that day when you had to tell that
Sorry.
Damon. I know. Well.
From our perspective as well, the story we wanted was a Damon Hill win in the Arrows. You know, not Damon Hill almost won in the Arrows. That, you know, that's, we always want the wins.
Well, he got the win 12 months later in Spa, and that was a crazy race as well. Like, we all know what happened with the rain and all the crashes at the start, and then Schumi running into DC. That was, I saw.
That was another I'd forgotten about. There were so many, I forget about all of these races. Yes, that was mayhem at the start. You know, James Allen and I were running around trying to get interviews and trying to work out what was happening, and you know, the whole way through with that delayed start. Again, you're trying to kind of fill in the gaps there. But yeah, and a special one for me, because obviously that was my old team. I'd always said to Eddie to Eddie Jordan when I left and went to ITV, at that point, the team hadn't had a win. And I said, when you get your first win, I'm having the first bloody interview. So EJ was like, you most definitely are having the first interview when we get the win. And that was the case. I kind of, obviously everybody wanted a piece of Eddie out on the pit wall. I locked eyes on him and kind of pointed at him, and he was like, come on, pull me through. And I was elbows out my way, everyone, I'm coming through. So I could speak to him first of all. I think for me, those are always, as a reporter, you want to get the story first. So the other big one that was a similar situation was when Lewis finally got the championship win. Ironically, was ITV's last race. We'd had all those years of Schumacher, and no disrespect to Michael, I don't mean that like, oh, I don't want Michael to win. He and the team had done a fantastic job, but obviously as a British broadcaster, it's always going to be a better story for us if it's a British driver winning the championship, and that was our last ever race. But again, I was determined. If you look at the footage,
I have seen it.
The conditions were, and you can probably see the cameras getting shoved out the way. It's chucking down with rain. I'm absolutely drenched, with half a hood on, my anorak and my hair everywhere. But again, it's like, that's my guy. I'm coming through. I'm getting the first interview. British driver, British win. I'm having this one, So yeah, that was another one that always stands out as well.
And it was a nice way to end the ITV era. Were you surprised in some respects you didn't get picked up by the BBC when they regained the rights?
Not really. I mean, all good things come to an end. I think they wanted to go with Lee, and that was absolutely fine. I would have been really pissed off if they hadn't gone with a female who knew about motorsport and was passionate about the sport. If they'd brought in some flighty thing, that would have really annoyed me.
Yeah.
But the fact that it was Lee Mackenzie, who I'd worked alongside Lee, it was like, great, go girl kind of thing. So no, I was, at the time it was a bit of a shock, but I've never planned my career. It's all been a set of happy circumstance. So, as a result of that happening, I then went back to doing touring cars full time, which I absolutely adore and have been doing ever since. I set up my own media training company. So you just have to go with the flow and see what life throws at you. I'm still in and out of the Formula One paddock. I probably do about 6 or 7 races these days. That's enough for me. Thank you very much. I had 20 odd years of doing all the Grand Prix. And when you look at the schedule, it's brutal, the schedule that they have now with 24 races. So thank you. No, there always comes a time when you need to hand on the reins to somebody else.
And what do you think of the current talent now? We look at, obviously Lee still does some stuff with Channel 4 in the UK, does a fantastic job. I love Lee. She's fantastic. Yeah. And of course, here in Australia, we've got obviously Sky Sports with through Fox Sports here in Australia. Got Natalie Pink and Rachel Brooks. Yeah. And of course, the Naomi Shiv, Danica Patrick, like so many good former and current drivers and current talent who have made their mark in broadcasting, who are very much passionately showing the love of Formula One. They're sharing the passion to a worldwide audience. I mean, it's a great time to be alive for women in motorsport, because the awareness of women in the industry is much bigger than it has ever been, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's not that brilliant because there's still less of us, and
True.
We're still not working on an equal footing, and that is across sport, generally speaking.
Yeah.
But I think it is becoming, people don't comment now. Everybody used to comment, oh my God, there's a girl, you're a girl. It's like, yeah, I am a girl, I've always been a girl. You know what I mean? It was like, I get now that actually, and I think when I was first on screen, as I say, everybody commented on it. Whenever there was a girl in a garage, people commented on it. And I think those of us who were working in the sport at the time were very much of the, so what, don't mention it, don't want to stick your head above the parapet, I'm just doing my thing, there's nothing, do you know what I mean? You didn't want to make a big deal of it. Subsequently, I think I've had so many girls, so many parents comment on the fact that, oh, when we saw you on the television, that's when I thought, oh, my daughter, she could, do you know what I mean? So with the benefit of hindsight, I have become aware of the benefit of that visibility, basically, and I love it now. I love seeing all this new young talent coming through. I think it's absolutely fantastic, as long as they know their stuff. That for me is the bottom line. You've got to know your stuff. I don't like, be it male or female, somebody who's just bouncing in there for the fun of, oh, I want to be near the drivers. That's not what the job is all about. And I think, you lose your credibility if you're like that. But none of the women you've mentioned, obviously, they wouldn't have the jobs that they've got if they were like that. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. I want to ask, where did that love of Formula One come from for you? Where did that spark first begin when you were growing up?
I've got no idea. I think I just came out of the womb with a love of wheels and engine. There's no family history of it. The closest I could get to any family or childhood connection with motorsport is the town I grew up in, a town in Hampshire in the south of the UK called Alresford, which is where the Warwick family come from. So I used to walk past Warwick Trailers, which was the family business, on my way to school every morning as a 6-7-year-old. I then later on became aware, just because you'd read about it in the local paper, of this guy Derek Warwick who was racing in stock cars. In fact, the reason I always noticed the family business was because it had a really cool Ford Capri, a Mark II Ford Capri, orange, parked outside. So yeah, exactly. I just loved cars. I just love, one of my biggest thrills as a youngster was when my dad got home from work and I was allowed to park the car in the garage. I just really enjoyed it. I remember as a kid going out for picnics and sitting on my dad's knee and doing steering the car. I just enjoyed it. And as a teenager, a lot of my misspent youth was misspent on the back of motorbikes, and so I never set out to work in motorsport. I kind of fell into it, but it was a very good fit when it did happen.
That's fantastic. I have a similar upbringing. My parents were not into motorsport, but for some reason, when I was a little kid growing up, I always used to see cars driving past if we were walking along somewhere to the shops or something, and I would say Ford or Holden or Valet, what our Aussie cars are. So it wouldn't, it'd be a BMW or something like that. And that spark just went from there. And then I watched the Bathurst 1000, as it was the James Hardy back in the day and Hardy's Heroes, and it was, that's a crazy time, and I just got addicted. I got hooked, and probably spent part of my misspent youth trying to drive, or trying to be cheeky. You're not supposed to, but
I know what you mean.
Yeah, not
Funnily enough, my mum is well into her 80s now, and she gets really upset if somebody invites her out on a Sunday afternoon when the Grand Prix is on. It's like, well, I want to watch the Grand Prix. So she's absolutely into it now.
Fantastic! But you're saying you spent a lot of time, because I've listened to your interview that you did with Greg Russ, an industry colleague of mine here in Australia, and I love that interview that he did with Gregory Aloysius Russ. But you meant,
I didn't know that bit. Did you just make that?
No. He jokingly says that. Gregory Aloysius Rust. He said that in the past. I'll hold you to that if you speak to him next. I'll have forgotten. That's okay.
My memory's not that good.
Oh, it's all good. But Greg, I remember Greg asked you, you actually spent a bit of time here in Australia. You did actually, I think, a working holiday here, and you spent quite a bit of time here in Australia. Go.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say. Well, I was going to say you. You spent a bit of time riding on a motorbike around parts of Australia and living the life.
I did. My 21st birthday present from my parents was a round the world ticket. What a fantastic present! I had to save up the money to actually fund myself when I was en route. But I was in my mid-20s by the time I got around to using it. And in the meantime, my best friend from school had gone out traveling to Australia. She actually never made it home again, so she's still out there. So one of the great joys of my job is being able to catch up with her every year when I'm out there. But yeah, so I went out to Australia and probably spent about 6 months there, and of course I did. I did the backpackers route, the hitching around, caught the bus up to Early Beach, worked on a diving boat at Early Beach, and then I hooked up, as you did in the hostel. Then you'd look for the who's going where, and a couple of brothers. It was on the run from Cairns across to the centre. So we went down to Yulara, and one of them had been riding around Australia on his dirt bike. So yeah, I kind of jumped on the back of that, and we went off to Kings Canyon for a few days, and then of course I got into trouble because we got back to their property, which is in fact where I'd learnt to properly ride a motorbike, riding a dirt bike around on their property. I got back to Sydney, and the guy who I'd been traveling around with arrived in Sydney, so he came to see us at my mate's house in Paddington, and George, my friend's husband, mischievously said, "Oh, I hear Louise is going to ride your bike," and I'm thinking, George, don't do that. I don't actually know. So my first experience proper of riding on the road was two up around Centennial Park, thinking, I don't know what I'm doing here. I really don't know what I'm doing. Me and my big mouth. I think I'd mentioned I had a little moped. I had a Vespa Piaggio Ciao back in London. You had to stand up and pedal on it to get it going. And I obviously talked too much about me and bikes this, me and bikes that, and he thought I knew how to ride a motorbike, which I really didn't.
Did you get yourself out of trouble when, learning the ropes?
I got myself out of trouble by not dropping the bike with him on the back of it, basically. I did fess up to the fact afterwards that actually my riding experience was very limited. But I did eventually get my license. So I am now legal on the road, I hasten to add. Not that I get out on the road at all enough. I actually got my bike license, A, because I'd always wanted to do it, but B, so that I could ride a motorbike to the British Grand Prix, because the traffic back in the day before they changed the road system and made it digital carriageway was notoriously appalling. So I got my license so I could borrow a motorbike and ride that to the British Grand Prix.
Fantastic. I like that story. And I'm sure you managed to dart your way through the traffic at that time. And of course, everyone loves the British Grand Prix. What is it about the British Grand Prix that makes it so popular? Like it's like I guess you could say a national institution. Like it's been going since
it is a national. It's the oldest Grand Prix. It was the first Grand Prix was at Silverstone back in the day. I think it's down to the fact that we have a fantastic history of the sport here. Obviously, if you look, the vast 7 out of the 10 teams are based in the UK. So it's a home race for everybody. But I think, and this isn't just me saying this, I know all of the drivers say this as well, that the fans at the British Grand Prix are appreciative of everybody. So you go somewhere like Italy and it's just Ferrari and that's fine. We love the Tifosi. They're absolutely passionate about the sport, but they're passionate about Ferrari. They're not passionate about any other team. Whereas, as I say, that the British fans, I think, are just passionate about the sport. So they love a team for a whole variety of different reasons. They love drivers for a whole variety of different reasons. Yes, of course, there is that, if there's a British driver doing well, of course they're going to, or even not doing well, of course they're going to get that bit more support. But I think it's that overall passion and knowledge and understanding of the sport. And just, you walk into Silverstone. I'm very lucky and very honoured to relatively recently be invited to become a member of the BRDC, the British Racing Drivers Club, who are the owners of Silverstone. You walk into an associate member. You have to be a full-on racing driver to be a full member. But you walk into the clubhouse and you look at the names and even see the people wandering around, and the real heroes of the sport, past and present. So there is just that deep experience of Formula One going back over many, many years.
What Grand Prix do you think is close to the mark when it comes to the fan participation, the interest? Like, you look at other venues such as
Is that a partisan question? Having just got back from a Grand Prix, which is the fans in Melbourne.
Maybe. I'm trying to be impartial here, but
honestly, you can't be impartial, because if you speak to anybody in Formula One, it's mad. And the last couple of years, I think with the Netflix generation, the drivers, right? It's like the Beatles are walking there. You know what I mean? There's people screaming. There are even some shots of I saw, and I'm thinking, you're a grown woman. Why are you crying? Because Lewis Hamilton has walked past. I mean, bless her. But yeah, the Melbourne Walk is just absolutely bonkers. And I think, again, the fans in every Grand Prix has a different feel to it. Another Grand Prix I always love is Brazil. The facilities there, they politely say they're not the best, but the atmosphere there is just, it's fans just shouting and singing and dancing all day long. And it's a similar kind of thing, when you get to Japan, where, as we're speaking at the moment, that's where the teams are. The passion in Japan is incredible, but it's incredible. You've never known such a polite passion. the passion in Melbourne is a mad bonkers passion. It's got that, Aussie feel about it.
Yeah.
So, and I think having the likes of, both Oscar and Dan, and obviously Dan's not having a brilliant time at the moment, but still that having two drivers, I think, Mark Webber really laid the groundwork there for getting, the Aussies sort of, excited about Formula One again. And yeah, it's one of everybody in the paddock. It's one of the favorite races because it's got the passion. That paddock is lovely. It's really old fashioned in terms of like, we've got some grass there. So many of the paddocks we go to, it's just tarmac, it's got that lovely garden party feel in Melbourne. So, and I was looking there this year and thinking, my God, I remember those trees were like little twiglets and now they're, massive, great big trees in the paddock. So it really feels like it's, it's grown and matured into a fantastic facility there at Albert Park.
I've yet to go to Albert Park, and I really do want to go in the next few years because it's just one of those goal kind of races that I want to be a part of. I've been following Formula One for years, and yes, I do have a partisan approach, so to speak, but I guess because I've been following the sport for so long, everyone remembers the time when Adelaide used to host the Grand Prix, and people still talk about it all these years on. It's almost 40 years, and obviously you can't compare... You can't compare Adelaide to Melbourne. They're two different cultures. They're two different eras. But what do you remember of the Adelaide culture compared to what we've got now? Like, do you think if Adelaide had stayed as a venue of the World Championship, do you think it would still have that kind of vibe like Melbourne has now? Or do you think...
Do you know, I think it was a different time, and it was a different... Adelaide was the last race of the season. Pretty much... every year, not every year, but the majority of years when we went there, the championship had already been won. And obviously, yes, there were still places to fight for. But I remember Adelaide as party central. We arrived, it was Melbourne Cup week. So, we'd fly down from Japan. So basically we had kind of a week's holiday before we'd kick off at getting things up and running in Adelaide. So, and as I say, that very often coincided with the Melbourne Cup. So that would be like we'd join in, only polite to join in the spirit there of Melbourne Cup. And so, and it was, I just remember a hell of a lot of parties, basically. So some great racing as well. That was where, and obviously it still happens in Melbourne, and it's come out to many other Grand Prix. But that we had the likes of Tina Turner would play on the Sunday night. There'd be a band playing on the Sunday night. There was one of the first Grand Prix I remember going to that made it something other than just a motor race. It was an event. So. And you didn't necessarily have to be a massive, passionate motor racing fan to come and enjoy the event. So yeah, I have very fond memories of Adelaide. But where at the first race of the season, it would have been, we would all have been arriving there with a different attitude. And again, times are slightly different now. But back in the day, you'd get to the end of the season, you could take apart and put back together the car very quickly. The beginning of the season, it would take the mechanics a lot longer. So the work was harder at the beginning of the year than it was at the end of the year. It's a different sport technologically now, so it's a whole different ball game. But I think all of those things, added into the fact, and that's why Adelaide has got this kind of legendary status.
That's a very good answer. Like when you look at Adelaide now, obviously it's now a supercars event here in Australia, and it still has that party feel. It is now the end of season that has taken over from Formula One, but it has that party feel. Everyone celebrates the end of the season. Do you sometimes wish you would want to go back there just to experience that vibe again, or are you happy to just sit back?
I was looking while I was down in Melbourne for the Grand Prix. Obviously, a lot of people the week prior to that had been in for the festival. So I did. So I had long conversations. I had a lovely chat with Gunther Steiner. I did an interview with Gunther Steiner in the Melbourne Arts while we were there. But so while we were waiting for that, we were talking about like what he'd been up to whilst he'd been in Adelaide, and seeing Valtteri Bottas, what he was doing. It sounds like that festival is a really great vibe. So yeah, I like to go back. I quite like to go to the festival, but I tend to look forward rather than look back. I would hate to go back somewhere and think, oh, it's not what it used to be, is it? True. So I'm very happy to. My memories of the Australian Grand Prix have moved on and are now centred in Melbourne. Adelaide, that event will always have a special place. But I'd like to go back and see, yeah. And I've obviously seen the supercars, running alongside the Grand Prix, but I've never seen them at any other track. I've also, and it's on my list, there's a few events I've never done. I've never done Macau. I really like to do Macau. I've never been to a NASCAR race. It's got to be in one of the Carolinas or something like that.
Yep.
I've never done Bathurst. I've driven past Bathurst, but I've never been to Bathurst. So I've got to do Bathurst at some point.
Oh my goodness. I was about to ask you that because it's a nice segue because since Formula One, you've now gone on to do touring cars for ITV with the British Touring Car Championship. I've often wondered, and I've always thought to myself, why does Supercars not give Louise Goodman a chance to do Bathurst? It would be perfect to work alongside Rihanna Cree and, of course,
I'm liking that idea. I was just going to come down and have a good time and drink beers up on the hill, but yeah, somebody's going to pay me to come down.
Do you really want to drink beers up on the hill? That is scary. I've been on top of the mountain. It is scary, I can tell you, but it is a cultural experience in itself. I can assure you of that.
Maybe I'll drive past it and have a look. Is it that? I'm not a beer drinker anyway.
Well, I'm a beer drinker, but I don't drink to excess, not to that point. But Bathurst,
I'll drive past and watch, and then I'll go and sip rosé or sparkling down in the bottom.
I love it. But touring cars, I think any common man or woman, if they love motorsport, they love touring cars. It's a fact. I think everyone. It's a car that you can.
They should.
Yeah, exactly.
They should.
They should.
I think.
Go on.
I think it's obviously. I think the supercars. Everybody knows about supercars, or the V8s in Australia. British Touring Car Championship isn't as well known here as it was maybe back in the Super Tourer heyday, back in the 90s when all the manufacturers were involved. It was the old, win the race on Sunday, sell the cars on Monday. It would be on sort of, on the sports pages, etc., etc. It's not as prominent in this day and age because there are so many more channels there is, sport per se. Even if you look at Formula One, our audience figures would be well up into the millions. We would regularly get 6, 7, 8 million people watching Grand Prix. There's no way, any of the broadcasters get that number now. Just people consume their sport in a very different way. We don't all sit down together on a Sunday afternoon and, turn on the TV and watch sport. So I just love the championship. I love working in the championship. I think, Formula One is the top, it's the pinnacle. I will often describe it. Formula One is an engineering formula.
Yeah.
Touring cars is an entertainment formula. If you look at the way that it's designed, and our championship over here is run by an Aussie, Alan Gow, who's done a stonking job with it, really, in keeping it relevant, keeping it fresh, keeping it exciting. And it is, it's punchy, it's fast and furious, it's 3 races across the day. The access that we as a broadcaster get to the drivers is fantastic. I couldn't believe it when I walked out of the Formula One paddock where, and back then it was a lot freer than it is now. It's so difficult to get access to drivers these days, but walked into a touring car paddock. Drivers were coming out of an engineering briefing to talk to me. I was absolutely gobsmacked. That would never happen. But I think that the drivers understand, and the sport and the teams understand that we're very much in it together. So ITV, as a free-to-air broadcaster, provides the lifeblood for them from a commercial perspective in terms of giving them the visibility. So and the profile. So they are very, very open to whatever we want to do and give us amazing access. But I think above all of that, the racing is exciting. I am regularly jumping up and down and shouting at my monitor whilst I'm sitting, backstage, watching the races before I go out and interview the drivers. And just because I'm getting so swept up in the action, I'm like, no, oh my God, it's all going on back there. So it's just brilliant. I love the racing. And I think the other thing, I think there was a time we had the Super Tourer era. Touring cars took a bit of a dive. It sort of, it wasn't maybe as seen as being as such an aspirational championship for a driver. The youngsters were all looking at, I want to be in Formula One, I want to race in single seaters. That is such a difficult thing to do now that, I'm talking to young drivers before they've even come out of karting, their ambition. If you look at Ash Sutton, who is our current champion and an incredible driver, his ambition Tom Ingram's ambition, Colin Turkington, their ambition was always to win the British Touring Car Championship. It was never to be a Formula One driver, because they knew that that was just a totally unrealistic thing for them to be aiming for. They would never ever have the budget or have access to the budget that you would need to get even close to a career in single seaters. So the sport is populated by some really, really good drivers. We no longer have the gentleman racers playing around at the back, because it's just not a place for gentleman racers to come and
Oh,
play
absolutely
anymore.
not. I've seen the racing. It's fantastic. I must say, vested interest, before I joined SBS, who's my employer these days, I used to work on a show here in Australia called Speed Week, and it's been around for 30 years. But we had, for a period of time, so you might know Speed Week, but there was a period.
I know of it, yeah.
Yep. But there was a period of time where we actually were able to obtain the post-produced package for the British Touring Car Championship, and we broadcast it for a couple of years, and I loved it. The racing was always fantastic. We didn't get to hear your voice, unfortunately, but I knew you were a part of the coverage. But David Addison, who's been a part of supercars in the past and has called a lot of great races.
Yeah.
Tim Harvey, of course, 92 champion, and people still talk about 1992 all these years on. And I still
It definitely does.
Yeah, and they provide great commentary. The racing's fantastic. I know there's an element of manufacturer involvement, but it's a lot of privateer or / independent involvement as it is now. And yeah, Tom Ingram, Ash Sutton, Colin Turkington. Everyone knows Colin Turkington. He's one of the most successful drivers in the history of the championship now. It's just a great thing to see that championship still has some relevance, even though it's not in the heighty period of super touring as it was then, but it's still popular and there's still an interest here in Australia. It is a great category. It's great.
And we've got just announced a brand new deal with TikTok, so it's going to have,
Yeah, I want to ask about that, because it is it's got quite a few people talking that deal with TikTok.
What are they saying?
There's a few people saying that I don't know if it's the right thing to go through the TikTok path, but then I think to myself, well, hang on, people have watched live streaming of esports, whatever, or even some big motoring events on Twitch. And yes, Twitch is a streaming platform for gaming. Obviously, YouTube has been around for a while. Facebook has been around for a while. People are saying YouTube and Facebook should be the better platforms because of the 16:9 aspect ratio. But then again, people are using TikTok more often than not now. It's the most popular social media platform in the world right now, and you'd be crazy not to go down that path to widen your audience on a worldwide perspective. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really been involved in the ins. Obviously, it's very recently announced, and I haven't had a real catch up with the whole gang about it. We were just laughing about the fact, actually, that we thought, if you look at the average TikTok audience, we've just increased the average age of the on-screen talent, in inverted commas, on TikTok by an enormous amount, because it is, it tends to be a youth platform, but I think anything that lets people out there know about our sport is great. I can't see any downsides. We already broadcast on other social media platforms, so I think to bring TikTok into the fold is absolutely. I can't see any downsides to it, quite frankly. If it attracts 10 other people to touring cars, then that's 10 people who wouldn't have been following it beforehand. And also, I think it's the worldwide aspect of it as well. Hopefully it'll mean anybody in Australia who wants to tune in the middle of the night can now do so.
I think I'll be one of those people.
To take a phone under the covers in your bed with you, isn't it? Than a full-on TV or a PC. So.
Yeah, well, I'll take that. Well, then again, you can watch TikTok on your PC or whatever, but probably watch it on the phone. But yeah, I'll leave that one at that. But I'll leave that one at that. I'm not a TikTok person. I've tried. I've got a TikTok account, but I just can't get into it. Maybe I might have to now because of the British Touring Car Championship. So
apologies then on behalf of the championship.
No, but there's an interesting period at the moment for the British Touring Car Championship, because at the moment it's struggling for a bit of relevance. You mentioned Alan Gow before. To those here in Australia, Gow, of course, has been running Toka for years, and before that he helped Peter Brock, of course, get out of his situation when he fell out with Holden. Everyone knows about that story. But Gow always seems to do a great job in promoting the championship. He's been very successful, but people are saying quite a few people on social media are saying the BTCC is struggling for relevance, particularly with
In
hybrid.
what way?
Oh,
With the hybrid, it was the first hybrid championship, touring car championship in the world, wasn't it? So
yeah.
I think it's a moving target at the moment where everything automotive is concerned, and obviously a racing car is part of the automotive world. So we're in the process of a transition from gas guzzling and oil and gas kind of fuels to cleaner power sources and electric, and who knows what else is going to be there, hydrogen, all these different potential lines that we can go down. So I think I don't know, I've never asked him the question, but if you said to Alan, is what we're doing now absolutely perfect, he'd probably say no. But the thing is, it's better than doing nothing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's a step in a right direction. You could debate how large a step it is, but it's 100% a step in the right direction. So, I think there are going to be naysayers the whole time, aren't you? There are always people who like to glass half empty. Don't like that. It's not relevant. Honestly.
Yeah, exactly. You got to change.
Not listening.
Well, you got to exactly. You got to change all the times.
You got to see what works.
Exactly.
If you look at any sport, they're always you look at soccer over here at the moment, there's been a whole load of fuss about the what's it referee. I hate football, as we call it, but the referee up in the clouds that we've had in rugby forever.
VAR, VAR.
Yeah, that's the phrase I'm looking for. Bill, I don't like that. Sport changes. It evolves over the years. So, and I think particularly a sport that has automotive at its heart. It has a vehicle at its heart. Of course, that's going to change over the years. But as I say, I think the bottom line is, Alan is doing something, and that's better than doing nothing.
Well, he did something when he did Super Touring, and I love Super Touring. I still love it to this very day, and I still remember watching the British Touring Car Championship in the 90s, the Super Touring era, and people still rave about how good the racing was back then. What's your fondest memory of Super Touring from that time? I know you were involved in Formula One, but do you have any fond memories of watching Super Touring?
I have no memory of it whatsoever. Honestly, it's a terrible thing to say.
Really?
I never watched touring cars. My life was Formula One, and it's an all-consuming life, Formula One. So yeah. I'd been to some of the circuits in the UK, Thruxton, which is my local circuit, obviously, where I grew up in Hampshire. Silverstone, obviously, I'd been to Brands Hatch. The very first Grand Prix I ever watched was at Brands Hatch back in the day. I'd never been to Alton Park or Snetterton or Croft, these circuits up in the Knockhill up in Scotland. I knew nothing about it other than the names of a few drivers who'd raced in it, but I'd never really paid any attention. Apologies, I missed the heyday, heyday in inverted commas of the Super Tourer era, but that's just the way it is.
Okay, that's a fair answer. But obviously Bathurst, we have to get you to Bathurst at some point.
Let's put that out there. I am available to work at Bathurst.
I like that. I like the sound of that.
This is the Motor Dream Podcast.
You've already explained you're a car nut. You love cars. You love motorsport. You've grown up since you were a young tacker following all things motoring. But I wanted to know just a little bit more about how much you like cars. So I'm going to ask you a few little questions, delve deeper into the passion that Louise Goodman has for cars and bikes and
motors. Get too technical here. That's
no technical stuff. It is. Okay. It will be very gentle here. Good. Do you remember the first car that you drove? You mentioned before when you were a young kid, you used to drive your parents' car up the driveway into the garage.
Austin 1100, LCG 335F was the registration number.
Ooh,
blue.
Wow, that's really cool. An Austin 1100. Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
That dates me, doesn't it? That really dates me.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, my when I was very young, I guess the earliest memory I had of my parents owning a car was a Morris Marina. I mean, they are.
Mhm.
They were shocking cars.
We had a Morris Traveller for a while as well, which we used to, when we used to go and see my grandparents, we'd stop off in an area called the New Forest, which is where I used to drive the car occasionally. But
Wow.
it had a little bit of a boot area, so we'd stop and pick up horse manure, so my dad could put it on the, on the vegetable patch when we got back home. So we'd drive the final half hour home with a boot full of horse poo.
Oh,
Yeah.
that would have reeked. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Dad.
Yep. What about the first car you actually owned? The first proper car you owned when you got your
First car I owned was a Ford Fiesta. It was a Ford Fiesta XR2.
I was going to ask if it was the
we'd go
XR2.
outside.
Oh,
Yeah, it was
nice.
the XR2. Yeah, yeah. It broke down within about 10 days of me buying it.
Really? 10 days?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, that would have irked you. That would was it a
It
brand
did.
was it brand new or second hand?
Oh, hell no. God, no, I couldn't afford a brand new car. So
I had to
I
ask.
No, I went back to the dealer and said, my car's broken down. What are you going to do about it? So actually we came to a bit of an agreement. He was a sort of friend of a friend. Or he was when I bought the car. He probably wasn't by the time I'd finished dealing with him.
but was it a fun car to drive when it was working?
And honestly, all I was concerned about with the car was that it went quick. Do you know what I mean? And it made a nice noise. So, that was the sort of boy racer, girl racer, hot hatch of the time.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, that's pokey. I'd before that, before I actually owned a car, I'd had a couple of I'd had a company car at a PR company I was working for, and one of those was a Fiat Uno Turbo, which I adored as well. That was great.
Yeah,
Black Fiat Turbo.
Oh, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I don't mind Fiats. I don't mind Fiats at all. As long as they work and they actually run properly. I won't tell that to my wife because she's of Italian heritage. I'll be murdered if I say anything bad.
It'd be worse. It could be an Alfa Romeo.
Well, unless you talk to Jeremy Clarkson, and he loves his Alfa Romeos.
Modern day, fine, but I guess back in I just have memories of all those Italian cars back in the day.
Oh,
Rust, the rust on a Lancia was legendary, wasn't it?
Oh yes, yeah. But there's something about Lancias that you just love them. The only Lancia I really love is the Delta Integrale, when it was in rally form. And actually, one of my favourite cars, BMW M3, the E31. Only sold in left-hand drive, and I still can't believe BMW never made it in right-hand drive. That irks me to this very day because we never had it sold in Australia, and the only way you can get one is if you have to import it, and they're not cheap. Absolutely not cheap. Anyway, that's my only gripe. The first road trip that you remember doing growing up?
Oh, heavens. What would have been the first? I mean, I suppose I remember it would be trips through the New Forest to see my grandparents, as a child. Those would have been the first trips that I remember doing. And going on a holiday, being stuffed in the back of the car and driving down to Somerset, which is quite a lot further, where my other grandparents lived, and we drove from there right up to the Lake District, which is up in the north of the country. My parents made things you could do then. We had, what did we have at that point? We had it was an estate of some description. It was it an Austin Princess or something awful like that? But anyway, I can't remember. But put the back seats down and made a bed. So myself and my two sisters, kind of slept all the way up to the Lake District, basically.
That's really cool. That's a nice little story, actually. But you wouldn't get it.
You wouldn't in the car for your kids then, couldn't you? You can't do that now. They've got to be belted in, upright, and I suppose all great safety things, but not as much fun as snuggling down in the car in Somerset and waking up in the Lake District.
Or riding in the back of the estate, or wagon as we call it here in Australia, and
looking out the back.
Exactly, and you can't get away with that now. You actually have to be in this, all clipped up and that.
No, some friends had some friends who lived over the road. I can't remember which Saab it was, but do you remember the Saab with the rear facing seat in the back?
Yes, I think I do remember that. Yeah, I do remember that. Actually, I don't mind Saabs. I don't mind Saabs at all. I think I like the Saabs of the late 90s, early 2000s. I think the 93 or something. They were my favourite. They looked really nice. It's just a shame they're no longer around because they went bankrupt. Anyway, that's another story. The first time you changed a tyre, do you remember when you did that?
Do you know, it probably would have been when I was rallying.
That's right, because you do rallying, and we haven't mentioned that.
I did. I know, I did. I had a few years of rallying, which I absolutely love, culminating in in competing on Wales Rally GB, which was at the time the British round of the World Rally Championship. I mean, how often do you get to do that? Compete on a World Championship event, albeit way down the back of the field. But I don't actually recall changing a tyre on any of my road cars. As in, I don't recall having a puncture, and if I did, I drove slowly flat home on it and sorted. But I really don't remember. I think it probably was when I was rallying. I changed far too many tires when I was rallying.
But isn't it true also that you also I think you were part of the pit crew for Honda for a Grand Prix.
Yes.
It was part of ITV.
Yes,
I think you had to change a tyre there as well. So you do have some experience in that regard.
My little claim to fame, I think I was the first woman to take part, as in on the car, in a pit stop in a Formula One Grand Prix. So yeah, it ended up being, I was supposed to do it with the BAR team,
That's
but
right.
at the last minute, I got a phone call from the sadly now recently departed but lovely Gilles de Ferran, who was the sporting director of the team at the time. He was a mate as well. So I'm really sorry, Lou, you're not going to be able to. Like, oh, you're kidding me, Gilles. It's a week to go before the Grand Prix, and we've got it in the show. So I phoned up another old friend, Andy Stevenson, who is still with what was the Jordan team and is now the Aston Martin team. He's the sporting director, but at the time, I think the team was Midland.
It was Midland, yeah. I think it was Midland. It was
I take
Spiker.
them on Terra,
Midland, yeah, or Spiker, or whatever it was.
So I phoned Andy and said, Steve, when he tried, well, yeah, you can do it. I said, well, do we need to? No, it's fine, you'll be fine. He said, it's not rocket science, is it? Everybody has to do it for the first time. So I went, and actually I'd been training with the BAR team for, months at that point. I used to go along to pit stop practice at every Grand Prix.
That's
And
right.
rightly so, you needed to make sure. And just to point out that this was in the days of refueling. So we were never looking for a sub 2 second stop. It was always going to be on the, based on the length of the refueling. But so I went along and did a bit of practice with the guys at Silverstone. And first time I went, it was totally different. I was rear left, wheel off. It was a totally different action, which I was thinking, oh my God, this is, but it all a bit of practice, and it all went fine on the day. So yeah.
Well, no one
Something
can
a
take
bit
that.
special.
No one can take that away from you. And obviously, Honda's loss was Spiker or Midland's game, as it was back in the day, and it was a
And
great
also,
experience.
funnily enough, Jensen retired on about lap 8 or something, so I would never have got to do the tyre change had it been on his car. So these things happen for a reason, don't they?
They sure do. They sure do. What about the kind of music you listen to when you go on a road trip? What do you listen to mostly?
I don't listen to a lot of music. I tend to listen to talk. I listen to podcasts. I listen to talk radio. I tend to listen to that more. That's changed over time. When I was back in my 20s and 30s, it was always music. But I tend to listen to podcasts and to chat and to talk radio a lot more now than I did back in the day. If I'm going to put anything on, I mean, it's going to be, my go-to band is the Rolling Stones. Always love them, always will. There's a band called the Blues Band as well, who I used to listen to, back in the misspent youth days. We'd have an album called Ready on cassette, as it was at the time, playing over and over again. And but yeah, these days it's talk.
Yeah, very similar to you now. It's a lot of podcasts these days, but if I still listen to music. Obviously, these days you stream it onto your phone or whatever through the Bluetooth, and for me, it's Queen. I'm a massive Queen fan. I am unashamed.
That's pretty old school as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, they've been together.
Great sing-along music, that's for sure.
Oh yes, absolutely. Got no shame in that whatsoever. So I still get mocked for it, being a Queen fan, but I don't care. I'm happy to admit it. Eating in cars, yes or no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're hungry, you eat, don't you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Because there's
I do draw the line, though, and I had a friend relatively recently was in the car. I can't remember what we were eating, but it was something that was flaking a bit.
Oh no.
And she started brushing it off. And I'm like, whoa. I'm fine with you eating my car, but you do not brush the crumbs off your knee and onto my floor. You keep your knees firmly pressed together till we get to our destination. You swing them out of the car, and then you brush all the crap off your legs. But yeah, I do a lot of long journeys. A girl's got to eat when a girl's got to eat.
Exactly.
Saves time. Anyway.
Exactly.
Both things. not strictly legal, I suppose, but there we go.
I cop it from my wife if I have a coffee in the car, and I always make sure I take the coffee cups out when I finish. But yeah, she's like,
I have two coffees in the car. I've got my little thermos one, so that's the second cup of coffee because that's going to stay hotter, and then I've got my other one that I'll drink first of all.
yeah,
I can't do
yeah, I'm the
can't
same.
do any journey without setting on every single journey I set off with a coffee in hand.
Nice. What about getting your license first go? Do you remember getting your license first
Yeah.
go, or did you have to take your time?
Right. No, first go, first go. I couldn't wait, because I lived in a little town that was 10 miles away from where I went to school, where a lot of my mates were. So I was forever having to get on the 10:30 bus home on a Friday and Saturday night when the pub didn't close till 11. So I was missing all the fun. So I couldn't wait to get my license. So yeah, that was my 17th birthday present was driving lessons. And I can't remember how quickly after I took my test, but I was, straight onto it. And yeah, passed first go. I still remember that scary time. A mate had come with me in the car. I got my mum's car. She dropped it all. I picked it up from her, and a mate had come with me to the test centre.
Yeah.
Waited, but then as we were driving back after I'd passed, we got to set of traffic lights. And the mate said, "Right, I'm going to jump out here." So it was like, okay. And I suddenly thought, "Oh my god, I'm in the car on my own for the first time ever. Wow, this is sort of a bit of a shock." But yeah, freedom.
Oh, I agree with that. But I had to get mine second go. I must tell this story. I attempted my first attempt to go for my license. Put the key in the ignition. I couldn't turn it over. I don't know why. And then I realised I put the wrong key in the ignition. It was a similar. The key looked similar to the actual ignition key for the car, but yeah, couldn't turn it over, and I couldn't get it out of the barrel. It was so embarrassing. I looked
That
at
is
and I flunked it, so I was so upset with myself. I had to wait another 3 months for a second attempt. So live and learn these things.
Bike test first go as well.
Say again.
I got my bike test first go as well. Smug face. You can't see the smug face. Smug face going in there.
Oh, you'll keep. All right, a two-part question here: the best car you've owned and the worst car you've owned.
Best car I've owned. I had two, and I love them. Audi. Oh, I'm having brain fart. Audi TT, the V6 with the 3.2 litre engine.
Ooh.
And the Tiptronic. But I absolutely loved that car. Both of them. It was just really good to drive. Had a right amount of poke. It was you could fit all sorts in the boot. I had it was a bit rounder at the front. They've kind of made it a bit more angular at the front now. I don't like that so much, but so that was my best car. I loved it. Really regretted selling. I was kind of tipped onto a really good deal to buy a kind of a cheap deal on a Porsche, which I bought. So that's why I sold my Audi. So I had this I recently had some money set aside to put in a new kitchen, which it needed, but I thought, well, I'll spend that on the Porsche first of all to have a bit of fun with it, because it's going to be at least a year before I get. And everybody was making money on this fantastic deal with Porsche, so I bought this car, and I just was so conscious of the fact that it needed to stay in really pristine condition. So I was parking it in the furthest spot in the car park, so the supermarket, so nobody opened the door on it, and it almost had so much poke that you couldn't have as much fun with it through the country lanes, because you couldn't let it go as much. So it was the Cayman S that I got. And it was 2008, and of course then we had the financial crash, and every stockbroker in the city was handing back the keys to their Porsche, and it was dropping like £1,000 pounds a month. So I panicked and flicked it on. Actually, had I kept it for another year, then you couldn't get your hands on a second-hand car for love nor money, so it would have gone back up in value again. But anyway, so that was the sorry end to my having these lovely Audi TTs, because by that point then I got a dog, so I needed a car that was a bit more practical with the dog in it. So Audi TT, the 3.2 version, was my best car. Worst car, Worst car. Worst car wasn't one that I bought. I mentioned the company car I had earlier, the Fiat Uno.
Mm.
I was away on a trip, arrived back from that trip to be met at the airport by one of my work colleagues who was driving a Honda Civic, and he had previously had a really he'd had a bizarre company car. It was a Camel Trophy. One of the Camel Trophy vehicles was his company car, so a Land Rover. Yes, what? I said, yeah. Teachers changed the my car. So this is my new company car. I went, oh God, you must be really. Really? I said, well, I'm not as pissed off as you're going to be. Yours is red. So that was how I found out that my beloved black Fiat Uno Turbo had been traded in for a red Honda Civic. And I as far as I'm concerned, I don't like red cars. The only cars that should be red are Ferraris. And I certainly didn't like a bloody Honda Civic. I was not happy. That was my worst car. Thank you, Tony Jardine. He's never been forgiven. I still bring it up.
Tony Jardine, of course, being a part of the BBC coverage back in the day. For
Yeah,
Grand
he was.
Prix.
He was the boss of the PR company I was working for.
No, because I know of
Yeah.
the Camel Trophy, because Land Rover, of course, involved in
Yes.
that at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of our accounts that we ran was the Camel Trophy PR.
I'd be filthy at Tony for doing that. I'd be absolutely filthy.
I was livid.
I bet.
Livid. Bloody Civic.
Yeah. Well, I could think of worse cars. I could think of really worse cars, like
I couldn't at the time.
yeah, true. Although you wouldn't want to piss off a Morris Marina owner, because there's apparently a Morris Marina club, and they absolutely hate Jeremy Clarkson because he absolutely trashes on them. So anyway, that's another story in itself. All right, one more thing.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you about the best road trip you've been on, but I'm not going to ask it in that way. I want to diverge a little bit, because I reckon I know the best road trip you've ever been on. 2001, US Grand Prix, around, unfortunately, the time of what happened at 9/11. So it was the first big sporting event after 9/11. And it was also Murray Walker's final Grand Prix as a commentator. Now, apparently, there's a lot. Please tell me the story. The flight home with Paul Stoddard, the chartered air flight to help celebrate Murray.
Yeah, that was flying. That wasn't flying back from the US Grand
right.
Prix. That was Murray's last flight back from a European race.
Right.
And so Stoddy, European Aviation, Stoddy flew a lot of the teams out on his plane. And the planes were based at Bournemouth Airport down in the south, which was close to where Murray lived. So Murray would be picked up by a car and would get on the plane in Bournemouth. He was the only passenger on the plane in Bournemouth, because the rest of the passengers got on the plane at Coventry, which is a lot closer to where all of the teams are based. But so this last flight coming back, Stoddy had the whole plane decaled up saying "Thank you, Murray" down the side of it. And it was just, I mean, to be quite honest with you, some of the stuff we're not really allowed to talk about.
I don't want to know. I think that can be left alone as is.
It was brilliant. Suffice to say, it was brilliant. It started off with us all lined up by the plane with party poppers waiting for Murray to arrive, because Murray knew nothing about what was going to be happening. Whereupon the pilot came hurtling, went, "No, do not pull," because obviously you can't pull party poppers and have all the streamers come out on an airfield. It's not very safe with aircraft engines.
No.
So we I still remember Murray's face when he turned up, and we were all there waiting for him as a guard of honor. Stoddy used to do this thing whereby he used to pick somebody to swap outfits with the hosties. So on this occasion, Murray was dressed as an air hostess and serving drinks to people. It was mayhem. It was mayhem. There was champagne being sprayed about inside the plane. It was carnage and hugely fun. Typical Stoddy, naughty and fun. It was brilliant.
That would be the best.
And yeah, Murray absolutely loved it. There's a picture somewhere. I think it was one of the something. It was Keith Sutton was a very well known F1 photographer, was on the flight, and Keith took a picture of me sitting on Murray's lap. So it's a bizarre picture. Murray's dressed as an air hostess, and I'm sitting on his lap, and very, with glass of champagne in my hand. Very, very random shot. But what a joy, what a privilege to have been able to work so closely with somebody like Murray Walker, who was and always will be absolutely one of the the doyens of sports broadcasting. Just such a joy, as well as being an absolutely gorgeous man.
Yeah, I can't agree more with that. That's just beautiful. That's a beautiful beautiful touch. I'd say that would be the best road trip, regardless of what vehicle it is, whatever. That's the best road trip I reckon you've been on. Just that trip alone.
It's a pretty memorable one. I love a road trip. I talked earlier on about traveling around Australia. I've got some great memories of that. My partner, who sadly isn't around any longer, but John Walton worked for Stoddy, actually, was
That's
the
right.
sporting director for Minardi. So we had there's an amazing road that goes from Faenza, where Minardi, as is now RB Cash App,
Whatever it is, I refuse to. I refuse to call them that. I'm calling them a Nardi. That's all I'm doing. I'm calling them a Nardi.
Visa Cash App RB. But there's a lovely road that goes from Faenza across the mountains that lead down into Florence, into Firenze, and John Boy and I did that on a couple of stunning roads. Absolutely beautiful to drive up those mountain roads, and come up to the top and you look down over the basin and there's Florence spread out ahead of you.
And Florence is beautiful.
That was a beautiful trip as well.
Yeah, but Florence is a beautiful city. I was there last year, and it was just an utterly beautiful place to be a part of. And the food is just amazing. It's chaotic. It's crazy. You get woken up by the bells in the cathedral in the town. It's just so beautiful. Yeah, we didn't get to drive. My wife and I didn't get to drive around the towns around Florence, but we absolutely enjoyed it. So it's a view. I can certainly vouch for what you're saying. It's beautiful. All right, Louise Goodman, this is the reason why I got you on the podcast. You wake up one morning and you get a strange message on your phone that says check your bank balance, and you think, oh, come on, this is ridiculous. This surely is a scam, whatever. But curiosity gets the better of you. You check your phone, you check your bank balance, and you find out that your bank balance has gone to infinity. You're an instant billionaire. You don't know how or why or whatever.
God, this is my recurring dream, please.
But you've become a billionaire. And then soon after, you get an email from this mystery benefactor, and it tells you that you can buy anything that you like. You can buy any car, bike, or machine. You can even buy a property if you want. You can buy a mansion or whatever. But it says that you're only allowed to buy 3 cars, bikes, or machines in your dream garage. So with that in mind, what is the first car, bike, or machine you would have in your dream garage?
It would be a Gordon Keeble.
Oh, I've never heard of that before. I've heard of Gordon
look
cars.
on a lot of people's faces. It's a car I read about. I can't even remember when I first read about it, and it just captured my imagination. So Gordon Keeble was a little engineering company set up here in the UK in the very late 1950s. So they designed this sexy little typical 1960s looking sports car, basically. So Gordon, so it was John, I can't remember exactly what they were called, Jim Keeble and John Gordon, I think it was. So and they were both engineers, so they came up with this car that was made principally in Hampshire, which is the county that I grew up in. And the company only lasted for a few years. They got their pricing wrong. I think they were charging £2,000 when Jaguar for the E-Type were charging £4,000 or whatever it was, but they dramatically underpriced it. So therefore, the company went bust. I think it was around until about 1967, and they made what I think is just a beautiful little car. I love the story. I just love the story of this beautifully engineered, by all accounts, car that just was a fantastic piece of British. But you're looking at one now.
I'm looking at one now. I was just trying to find it because, as I said, I've never heard of Gordon Keeble before until now. You're the first person that's actually told me.
There you go. There's a new one for you.
Oh, I love it.
It's nice, isn't it?
It reminds me a little bit of the Peugeot for some reason. The front end, it looks like the. No, okay, no, I take it back. No, all right. No, actually, no, I lie. For me, I thought, it looks a bit like a Peugeot, but it actually doesn't. It looks really nice. It's only 100 made between
Exactly.
60,
And the
40,
last one, they
yeah.
actually only made 99. The last one was made a few years after it had all gone tits up out of spares. So they manufactured 99 and then they made the 100th out of spares. And you know, I think something like 90 of those cars are still running.
Holy
That's
moly.
how well engineered that car was.
Well, to put this into perspective, it's powered by a Chevrolet 5.4 litre V8. So it's the same engine that's
Yep.
actually used in the Holden Monaro 327, the GDS 327 here in Australia. So it's the same engine. It's a Grand Tour, two-door saloon, front engine, rear-wheel drive with a 4-speed manual. I think a Borg-Warner manual, I would say. But oh my goodness! And I love the bonnet badge.
Sexy little car, isn't
It
it?
is actually really nice. I absolutely love it. I've never, as I said before, I never heard of it until now. But my goodness, it looks good. And I love the badge. The tortoise
I'm
badge.
very happy, the little tortoise. I'm very happy to be able to introduce you to the Gordon Keeble.
My
There you go.
goodness. That is so random. So random. I absolutely love
It's
it.
always been up there for me. And I read about this car somewhere, I can't remember where, and that sparked my interest. So I read a bit more about it. And then I was at an event at a hill climb at a place called Chelsea Walsh, which is here in the UK in the sort of West Midlands. And I just heard this engine fire up, turned around, I thought, oh my God. And it was the first time I'd ever actually seen one in the flesh. So the poor people who owned it, this lunatic woman came bouncing up to like, can I sit in your car, please?
But mind you, I do like the fact that it's been designed by Giugiaro. Giugiaro's designed the car. And
Yes,
it says,
the style,
Oh.
yeah.
I can.
They wanted to make a sort of British Ferrari was I think the ethos behind it at the time. So hence going to Italy for the design and styling.
Oh,
Yeah,
I love it. I love it.
there you go.
Oh,
That's my gift to you.
oh, that is
Knowledge
that is fantastic. I'm impressed. I'm very, very impressed. All right, the second.
But that's number one.
That's number one.
Number one.
What's the second car?
The second car. I was thinking about this yesterday. I'm sticking British here.
That's all right.
I'm going for an Aston Martin DB12. I've always loved the Aston Martin brand. I've loved the look of their car. And I thought, I've already got my Gordon Keeble. I don't want a DB6 or a DB5. I'll just go for a shit-kicking modern style Aston Martin. So yeah, so I've gone for the DB12. Can't decide whether I'm going for the Volante or I'm going to go for the hard top, but that's what I'm going for. I don't know that much about the car. But I like the look of it and I like the sound of it.
Well, 4-litre V12 bi-turbo, or
What's
V8,
not
sorry, V8 bi-turbo with an 8-speed ZF automatic gearbox. Although you probably have paddle shifts on them. You'd go the paddle shift.
Yeah. You go paddle, absolutely. You know, I was looking at thinking about this yesterday and I watched a couple of. I mean, it's beautiful to look at, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love the look. For me, you say Aston Martin, and it's James Bond, you know. And as a kid, my dad always used to take us to the cinema to watch the James Bond films. My mum wasn't interested, but I just love that. It's such a. I think it's just a beautiful mark.
Yeah.
Love the history of it, love the styling of the 60s, 70s cars, and the 50s cars as well. So I thought, no, I need a modern shit kicker. So that's why I've gone Aston Martin, and that's why I've gone with the DB12. And everything I was, you know, I went down the YouTube rabbit hole last night looking at videos of it, you know, which is
as you do.
God, I'm never going to be able to afford one of those, am I? But as a garage, I'm having that.
Yeah, definitely. Although, mind you, I love Aston Martins, but I'm not going to go the DB12, and I've told this in a previous episode. I'm going to go down the DBRS9, the racing version, the GT3 version. I love the V12 in that. It is just, I know it's old school in late 2000s, but there's something about the DBRS9 which is like obviously the racing version for GT3 racing. I just love it. I've
literally just gone with get the newest because I've got my old car. Let's just go for the newest shit kicker that they've got. So that's
nothing wrong with that.
The small amount of logic behind my my choice for the DB12. There's even less logic behind my choice of my third vehicle.
Please tell me.
And I don't even know exactly what it is, but I'm going with an off-road bike. because we talked earlier on about my my trips around, my travels around Australia, and my fun riding dirt bikes around my mate's property. I have always wanted to, and I've never done it, and that's why I'm buying myself a little off-road bike. I'm probably going with a Honda because I was very very lucky to be invited down to the Dave Thorpe off-road riding school here in the UK a while back. So Dave, an amazing rider, and spent the day with us, teaching us. And so I have this dream of going on a lovely road trip somewhere on off-road bikes. I've got so many mates, and funnily enough, it's going to sound like this is a large name drop here, but I was chatting with Mark Webber about this when I was at the Grand Prix, and he was just off on a road trip with some of his mates after the Grand Prix. I've always wanted to do that. I'm not a good enough rider. I've got various. Tim Harvey does it the whole time. I'm listening to him. I think I want to do that. I want to do. So I'm thinking, right, I'm going to get myself a dirt bike, and then I'm actually going to have to go and do it because that bike is going to be sitting there, and every time I walk into by now I can afford a large garage, which I don't have. It will be there just taunting me and saying, come on. If you don't do this now, you're never going to do it. So that's why I'm getting myself nothing too big. I'm not, I don't want anything I've got myself in trouble before by going for bikes that are much too big for me to be able to handle them. I'll stick with small. I'll stick with containable as long as my feet can just about touch the ground, which I should be all right with. I've got quite long legs, but something my feet can touch the ground, and I can just go off and have some off-road fun. And I'd love to do a trip through somewhere like Morocco or somewhere like that.
What about Dakar? Would you like to follow Dakar? Would you like to get, like, say, for example, a CRF 450 or a 250 and maybe do the Dakar experience if you really wanted to? That would be
quite something, wouldn't it? Now there's a thought. Can I have like a backup crew?
Well, I believe Toby Price is available. Like, he's got no ride at the moment, so
somebody to pick it up for me if I drop it, or when I drop it, rather.
I'm sure I can. I'm sure I could talk to a few people behind the scenes if we really wanted to. But no, look,
that would be brilliant.
Yeah, actually, have you always wanted to do something like Dakar, or at least try and follow it from a media perspective? Because Dakar's a massive event, and we know.
I'd love to either tackle the other event down there that there's always captured my imagination is the rally, the Kenya rally.
I think
Safari,
that would be. Oh, that would be
the Safari
awesome.
rally. That would be an amazing event to follow. I can remember hearing stories from people back in the day about it. You just look at the iconic footage of there's a car leaping up with a silhouette of a giraffe or something in the background. I mean, just stunning. So, yeah.
That would be really.
So that's the third vehicle.
That's amazing. 2 cars and a bike. So for the sake of it, we'll go with the Honda CRF. It can either be the 454 stroke or the 252 stroke. Either way, but we could.
I'm just going to go with the 250 because it's lighter, and I don't need to be. It'll be easy to pick up because I will inevitably drop it.
Yeah, okay, we'll accept that. The Aston Martin DB12 and the Gordon Keeble. I still can't get over that. The Gordon Keeble.
I love the fact I've introduced you to a car you've never heard of.
I've never heard of the Gordon Keeble until now.
Probably, and it may well be the same for some of your audience as well. I'm sure it will.
Actually,
why would they have heard an obscure British car from the 1960s that they made less than 100 of them in the first place?
That is crazy, and I love it, and I've loved the fact that there's still 90 available to this very day. They would be worth priceless. They'd be worth probably in 6 figures now. That is just incredible.
They are. I'm sure I can remember many years ago seeing one for sale, and I think it was something like £14,000. And how many times have I kicked myself that? I mean, £14,000 was a large amount. Well, it still is a large amount of money, but it was far larger amount of money than I had available at the time to spend on something like a car. But you think, that would have paid back, wouldn't it?
I was expecting like a McLaren F1 or even a current day McLaren. Like the Gordon Murray design one. I know Gordon Murray has, I guess, reimagined the F1 in a current sense now, which looks absolutely incredible. But no, I never expected that. That is, wow, I'm impressed. Very, very impressed with that Dream Garage. I don't think I could, wow. I'm going to be thinking about that for many days after this. It is just crazy. And I'm every time I keep looking at it, because I'm looking at it now as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, I actually would like that. I would really like that. That would be really, really cool. It's a nice car. I like it. I really do.
I love the whole era of the 60s anyway.
Yeah,
So
me too. Me
get
too.
yourself a little mini skirt and a pair of long boots and jump in that. I can pretend well. Job's a good one.
That's a real good one. I like it. It's a real good garage. I'm very impressed. I want to ask before we let you go, just a couple of questions. You mentioned Johnny Herbert before when he said, "Oh, let's play a bit of sport." And I know he meant that in a a jovial sense, that he would just try and ribble you and all that. There's one thing that, and I want to ask this before. David Coulthard, 2004.
I know where you're going.
Yes, I do know where. For context, David put you on the spot live on television about a certain part of your body in a very nice, in a very joking manner, but it kind of made it a bit awkward for you, although you're more embarrassed than awkward. Explain to us what.
No, I was pissed off that I couldn't think of a smart retort to come back to him with. So it was I just honestly, more and more these days, you look back on things like that and think, oh god, it was a different era, wasn't it? But so to explain the story to people, so this was at the Canadian Grand Prix.
That's
DC
right.
came out with this at the previous race, which I seem to remember was the Nürburgring. DC had basically blown what would have been Red Bull's first, I can't remember, it's points or podium. I think it might have been their first podium, because he'd been done for speeding in the pit lane. And so my mistake was, because DC could be a little bit touchy at times, my mistake was I told him I was going to ask him the question. Had I not told him that, we would have been fine. I said to him, listen, I'm going to ask you at the end of our interview, we've got a live interview planned for before the race. I'm just going to throw in a quick line about, the mistake he made at the Nürburgring, because I didn't want him getting arsey with me. And so anyway, as I was saying, huge mistake. That gave David time to think about it. So when I said to him, mistake, have you been, practicing with the pit lane speed limit? He came out with this dreadful line about, yes, I've been practicing, I've been pretending it's your nipple and caressing it gently. And it was just like, to say, you couldn't say that kind of.
You can't.
It was all I could hear in my ears was everybody, both in the gallery and Jim and Tony, that pissing themselves laughing. I couldn't think of anything to come back with, so I just kind of went, "Thank you, David." And they went back. If you look at the footage now, it goes back to Jim, and he's having to suppress laughter. And but to me, honestly, that was just two mates.
Yeah.
DC as a mate who I'd known for a long time, having a bit of banter with me. Was it inappropriate? 100%. But that it was what I took it in the spirit which was intended, which was just two mates having a bit of a laugh. But it was very funny. The person, what was really funny was David's mum was not David. I can't believe he did that, so there was all this external, oh my god, there was DC was like, and I were both like, oh yeah, whatever. But Dave was like, oh my god, my mum's not happy with me.
He got told off. I love that. That's a nice little comeback. It's
told off by mum.
Nice little comeuppance for you, I'm really sure. Last question. World Championship this year, Max Verstappen doing a fantastic job. Well, let's face it, he's the class act of the sport at the moment. I know people have said, it's boring right now. It's so dominant. One person's dominant. But we've seen Ayrton Senna do that in the past. We've seen Nigel Mansell do that in the past. We've seen
everyone do that. I think the difference was that in some of those eras, we had two drivers in the same car doing the same thing. But, it was the same with Michael. We had the Benetton years. We had the Ferrari years. We've had the previous Red Bull years. It's just the Mercedes years. That's the way that the sport goes. So...
Do you think anyone can beat Red Bull at the moment? We know that obviously
it can, because
of course,
in Melbourne. So,
but do we think? But do we think that other than Ferrari, do you think there's any do you think McLaren have got a chance? Do you think some of those other teams have got a chance to beat Red Bull this year?
I think there's always a chance. I think from what we've seen so far, it's early days in the championship, but from what we've seen so far, it's going to take. I think Ferrari are the closest, and obviously clearly have already beaten them. Some of the other teams, it may well take a bit of rain, a bit of unusual circumstances, or as we saw in Melbourne, misfortune on Max and Red Bull's part. But people I mean, if you look at the development that, say, for example, McLaren made on their car across last season, now it's going to be difficult for them to do anything like that this year, because the car, if a car is pretty good when it comes out, you've got less facility to develop it.
Yeah.
But people are going to be developing their cars. They're going to be learning about their cars. They're going to be, and different races, different circumstances. So who knows? I think they're beatable, as we saw in Melbourne. They're beatable. So it's a really tricky one, because nobody, if you turn on the television and you already know the result, it's very easy to turn the television off again. It doesn't have that drama, that excitement, who's going to win, what's going to happen, which is, it's almost, you can't complain about that, because what we're witnessing, and as we've witnessed previously with all those eras of different teams, is just a team and a driver who are at the top of their game. And again, that's what's aiming for. Everybody's aiming for. It just so happened that they're the ones that have got there. So you can't be dismissive or negative about what's such a, the facility to see a team and yet another Adrian Newey, car winning another championship with a driver like Max Verstappen, who is, one of those, few in a generation that come along drivers.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, Adrian's a class act. We've seen him win. Well, you were there at the time when Leighton House was around. Like, he helped.
Yes.
So you know what Adrian's like. He has.
We started out. We laugh about the fact that we started out, in Formula One at the same time and at the same team. And in fact, we laugh about the fact that Adrian's. I joined Leighton House at the second race of the season, and we brought the car. So the previous race in Brazil, the car had run really well. I can't remember where it finished, but then we debuted with a new car at the second race. You didn't have to have a brand new car at the start of the season back then. And the driver struggled. It wasn't, in my naivety, my first race with the team, said to Adrian, well, what's wrong with this car? It's clearly not as good as the last one. So Adrian sort of shouted at me for asking what was a bloody ridiculous and insensitive question. So I went to my then boss, Ian Phillips, said, I think I've just upset the chief designer. And Adrian, when we've had this conversation subsequently, went to Ian and said, I think I've just upset the new press officer. So we've laughed about that on a regular basis ever since.
It's a really nice story to end. And it's how it's come full circle now that Adrian is one of the most successful designers in the sport, and you were there right at the beginning, and it must give you great joy that Adrian's done so well, and you were both right smack bang in the middle in that period of time where you were young and ready to learn and embrace.
Now we're old and jaded, and I think, to be fair, Adrian's done a lot better than me.
Oh, don't say that. You've done exceptionally well.
I've done all right in my little world, but but Adrian doesn't need your money to buy the fantastic stable of cars.
No, he doesn't.
He's already got it that way.
exactly. And but hey, we all can dream, and I appreciate the time that you've given me. Thank you so much. I've absolutely
happy chatting with you.
And likewise, and I've really enjoyed it, and I never imagined I was going to be talking to someone like you. I've grown up listening to you in my teens in my early 20s, admiring your work and how well you've handled yourself professionally, in a life situation. It would be very, very hard for anyone to have someone shout in your ear. You're trying to do the interviews, you're trying to do your job. There's so many different things going on, but you handled it with such grace and dignity. I absolutely admire what you've done, and I hope.
You're very good. There's been some monumental cock-ups along the way, but I will take the grace.
There's nothing wrong with a cock-up. No, there's nothing wrong with a cock-up along the way. But I think you've inspired a lot of people, particularly those that that have come through, that are doing a great job now, following in your footsteps and continuing that trend of broadening the awareness of motorsport. So thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the time to have a chat. I absolutely appreciate it.
Great pleasure, Connor.
Louise is a class act, both professionally and personally. Her demeanour and her insight into a world that a very select few get to experience was really fascinating and yet extremely entertaining. It also helps that she was bitten by the car bug from a very early age, so her passion was evident from the moment we started our conversation. And what about the Dream Garage, especially the Gordon Keeble? I bet you're like me and had never heard of it before until now. I was genuinely shocked and pleasantly surprised at not only how beautiful it looked, but how it shared many mechanical underpinnings with the Holden HK Monaro GDS 327. Plus, they were both two-door coupes. It's amazing when you learn something new about a car that you've never heard of before. I hope you enjoyed my extended chat with Louise, and my profound thanks to her for being so generous with her time. You can catch Louise as part of the official broadcast of the British Touring Car Championship exclusively on TikTok via the BTCC account. For those in the UK, you can watch every round live on ITV4. You can also follow Louise on Instagram and Twitter/X at Lou Goodman Media. Speaking of socials, we're on all the channels and the handle is The Motor Dream, which is also the hashtag. Head to the Motor Dream podcast website at themotordream.com.au, and that is where you can find previous episodes as well as show information and links to our socials. And make sure that you like and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please leave some feedback, be it a quirky car question or a guest suggestion. And don't forget to spread the word about the Motor Dream podcast, because that's how we grow our audience. Thank you as always for listening to the Motor Dream podcast. Until next time, I'm Connor McNally, and please drive safely out on the roads. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Motor Dream podcast. This series is proudly produced by Beast Productions.